So, hello.
Hello.
Today, we want to discuss a few issues, especially the recent recognition of Palestine by France and a number of other countries, and the vote of the United Nations General Assembly. And today, I am joined by Emmanuel Dupuis, who is the president of French Paris-based think tank IPSE,
Hello.
and an associate expert with us, MENA Research Center. And thank you for your time, and thank you for agreeing to answer a few questions for us. So I'd like to go directly to our question, and I'd like to ask you about the France's recognition that was framed as a lever for peace and tied also to Palestinian commitments, for instance, about the Hamas disarmament, governance reforms and hostage releases, while co-chairing the UN summit with Saudi Arabia to advance regional integration and security guarantees. And this started to build up from July 2025 on this French-Saudi conference calling for Gaza ceasefire and the way towards the statehood. So I'd like to ask you, what motivated France's decision to recognize the Palestinian state? How does it fit into the French policy regarding this issue and regarding the region? And how does its partnership with Saudi Arabia actually, why Saudi Arabia?
Well, first of all, France's decision was not a decision taken at the last moment. It was a very thought decision and very old decision, first of all, because in 1980 already, in the Venice conference, France at that time with President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing said it was needed for Palestine to have full-fledged recognition after all of the United Nations resolution, starting from the ones in 1947 and in 1967. So I think Macron's position is not a new position. It has always been the one of France. What is new is that it had gained momentum among some of its partners, not only Europeans, but some partners on a more wider picture, Japan, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. But again, France's position to recognize, or France's will to recognize Palestine is, I think, a milestone. It's not an end state. First of all, because prior to the decision to recognize the Palestinian state, already 148 states have done so. Now we are 156. So it's 10 new, well 9, if I count correctly, 8 new states which have decided to recognize Palestine. So it's a step-by-step procedure. We have now more than 3/4, 75% of the General Assembly of the 193 states who are willing to recognize Palestine. This is why this evening and this night, last night, Palestinian Authority officially asked to have a seat at the National General Assembly. Now, coming back to the French and Saudi position, it's more than the recognition of Palestine. It's the will for a two-state solution on one hand, and on the other hand, and it's not a historical perspective, to have the ceasefire committed or fully implemented. The January ceasefire, which was broken by March by the Israeli counterparts. So it's a double standard, a double position. A long time commitment for the day after the ceasefire comes, but of course reaffirm for this ceasefire to begin to have a political perspective. And I think this is what changes everything. First of all, as I said, 148 countries have decided to recognize Palestine way before France has done so. A certain number of other European partners, let's say, just take the example of Spain, have decided by May to recognize Palestine way before the 25th of July, Franco-Saudi will to have this conference for the two-state solution, or the conference so-called Conférence du jour d'après, conference of the day after, once the fighting is over. Already half of the European countries have decided to recognize Palestine. So what is important is, why are there still countries who do not want to recognize Palestine? Because for instance, well, Germany, Italy, Denmark, Netherlands, just to take the example of and not to forget Hungary and Czech Republic. Now, Czech Republic is very interesting because during the last vote, which happened 2 weeks ago at the United Nations, calling for the recognition of a Palestinian state, the Czech Republic abstained when a certain number of countries vetoed. United States, of course, obviously, Israel, Argentina, and Hungary. But this time, the Czech Republic decided to abstain and not recognize Palestine. And the Czech president was very clear, saying that till Hamas is not disarmed, till the 48 hostages have not been given back to Israel, if the Palestinian Authority is not clearer on its position, and if, and mostly regarding the fate of Hamas or the role that Hamas would play in the new governments of Palestine, it is not the good time to recognize Palestine. Giorgia Meloni, when she took the floor a few days ago at the General Assembly of the United Nations, said exactly the same thing, saying that, of course, she is willing to recognize Palestine. But since there is a armed Hamas, and therefore the militarization, the potential militarization of a political solution for Palestine, she does not, assess the fact that it's not the right timing. This is exactly what Chancellor Friedrich Merz would have said if he would have come to the United Nations General Assembly. The former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Annette Baerbock, said and was committed to say that it was time for Germany to recognize Palestine, but still to this extent, it has not done so. And of course, let's take the other examples of those countries who are willing to recognize Palestine on the same basis of France, but with slight differences. And this is important because it sort of makes collapse the idea that France is the leader of a coalition which will play a bigger role in the reconstruction of Palestine and the will to recognize Palestine. Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada was very clear, as well as Australia. They have their will to recognize Palestine, but at the utter condition that Israel is implicated in the process of building a two-state solution. You cannot declare a two-state solution with only recognition of one state and the other not willing to recognize the state. So again, it's very interesting to see that the anticipation announcement of France is sort of could be considered as a will to have a sort of a wishful thinking of what should be the solution to bring back or to assess or to construct peace in the area. And this is why it's interesting that France and Saudi Arabia are at the leadership of this, because Saudi Arabia is, of course, in a double standard. It is willing to recognize Palestine, but at the same time, it is willing also to normalize its relation with Israel. It is willing to play a role of mediation and facilitator, but with the ambition to play a leadership role in the area, and therefore willing to showcase more than Turkey, than it is willing to be more assertive and more reactive in the recognition of Palestine. So it's a sort of a double hat, or let's say a billboard where Saudi Arabia is trying to force its destiny to confirm its will to be a leader in the Gulf country area, but not only in all of the Arab Muslim states.
Yes, I understand, and especially the fact that the Saudi Arabia has tied the normalization process with Israel to the Palestinian issue. And this also brings us to another question. It's about Israel's response. And obviously, Israel responded with the condemnation across all its political spectrum, and labeled even the move to recognize Palestine as a reward for terrorism and surrender to Hamas. So how would you explain Israel's unified condemnation of this recognition as a reward for terrorism? I mean, not to explain this, but to explain actually how this kind of condemnation would influence the policies and approaches, particularly regarding the, for instance, the issue of West Bank annexation, or even the on international stage, the strained relations with, for example, France, United Kingdom. What kind of impact will it have, this recognition, on the Israelis' policies and Israelis' reactions internally, so I mean regionally, and on the global stage?
Well, first of all, on the national states, it gives back the momentum and a sort of ease for Benjamin Netanyahu, because Benjamin Netanyahu is willing to play the flag effect, saying that all of the world is linked to the fact to destabilize Israel with this institutionally recognized Palestine. Again, not in the perspective of historical perspective, but in the perspective of doing it now at this moment precisely. When Netanyahu is saying that it has almost finished the job to eradicate Hamas. This is what he said when he came at the General Assembly, in the General Assembly aula yesterday when he made his speech. So I think it's very interesting to see what would be the situation of the opposition, or the position of the opposition. Benny Gantz on one side, Yair Lapid on the other, Naftali Bennett on the other. Precisely the political forces, centrist, leftist, who have sustained the military operation since the beginning, after the attacks of the October 7, 2023. Is there still this momentum? Is there still this capacity to maintain Benjamin Netanyahu in power? If you look at the polls precisely and very, let's say, on a contradictory basis, he is still popular, and he could still win the elections if there were snap elections tomorrow, regardless of its judicial status, regardless of all of what the judicial system in Israel is accusing him of: active corruption and a certain number of judicial affairs that he has to cope with. Now, regarding the regional perspective, I think we must be very cautious in the fact that Israel, in a way, has done what a certain number of Arab states have always dreamt of, which is to lower or eradicate, or no, eradicate is a bit too hard, leverage to the hamper, I'm sorry, looking for my words today, hamper the Iranian threat. And I think there is a sort of double standard here. Let's be very clear. When Israel bombarded Doha a month ago, they did it with the silent assessment, or the silent legitimization or acceptance of a certain number of countries. First of all, because the Israeli planes crossed a certain number of aerial domains of Arab countries, which publicly said they were against the Israeli strike, namely Saudi Arabia. So it's very interesting to see that there is sort of, again, double standards on this issue. And of course, everyone is willing to recognize Palestine. Everyone is willing to help Palestine in its reconstruction. During the night yesterday night, was created the Urgency Coalition for the Financial Viability of Palestine, under the auspices of France, Great Britain, Japan, Saudi Arabia, with Spain, Belgium, Denmark, Iceland, Ireland, Norway, Slovenia, and Switzerland. Concretely, and this is something which was needed, urgently needed, as everyone knows, Israel is perceiving the fiscal benefits, the fiscal, I say in French, les recettes fiscales, fiscal, I don't know how to translate that.
Yeah, I understand.
The financial capabilities of Palestine are under the authority or under the custody of Israel. I don't know how to put it in another way. And since October 2023, Israel has not given the money to the Palestinian Authority in a sort of well, let's say, taking in hostage the Palestinian Authority. Bezalel Smotrich, the Minister of Finance of Israel, went further on, saying that he wanted to suffocate, étrangler the Palestinian Authority to its total collapse. So there is this urgency, and the recognition of Palestine comes also with the fact that there is a consensus to help urgently, immediately, the Palestinian Authority. King Felipe VI was very clear. He called for an immediate, and he named it several times, immediate aid, humanitarian aid, and money transfer. $190 million will be transferred during the weekend directly to the Palestinian Authority. Is that enough? Absolutely not. But Saudi Arabia is committed, because Saudi Arabia will give of this $170 billion, 90 billion of million of dollars. So there is, I think, this element in that has to be taken in consideration, that Saudi Arabia wants to showcase that it is the most engaged in the recovery of Palestine. And
with the promise of $300 million.
Yeah, but that's for long run. I'm speaking about the immediate effect, which was decided yesterday, just as a consequence of the recognition. The reconstruction of Gaza will not cost millions; it will cost billions, hundreds of billions of dollars. So, of course, we will see who will be helpful on this perspective. Of course, a certain number of countries have decided to aid financially Palestine, Japan, but not yet in a full-fledged capacity recognize Japan, the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, I understand. So let's jump to the third question, and this question concerns the United States. And we've seen that the United States was absent at the Franco-Saudi summit in June. And during the UN General Assembly vote, the United States was somehow isolated because there was United States and if I'm not mistaken, 9 or 10 other countries who voted against the recognition of the Palestine. 9, yeah. And I'd like to ask you, so with this American isolation on this question at the United Nations, but being a UN Security Council member, permanent member, not recognizing Palestine, and this Franco-Saudi leadership on this issue, will it have an effect on the United States to shift its policies, or will it maybe impact Washington to adapt its policies, maybe to be more flexible? Or will it actually have a negative impact on the Franco-American relations? Because this is also an important question. And we've seen, for example, Emmanuel Macron, when he was the French president, when he was in New York, that he had to call Donald Trump because he was queuing in line, and the traffic police didn't want to let him to let his cortege through. So, what is your opinion?
I think Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump was very clear. One, regarding the other, when they spoke together at United Nations. United States thinks that the French position is symbolic. French president thinks that it will impulse and it will shift the American position, but none of the two countries will go in the direction of the other. France is not and has not the capacity to convince the United States, and the United States will always be committed to sustain and defend Israel. Again, voting vetoed several times during the last United Nations vote, when already 142 before the French decision to officially recognize Palestine. It voted against, as you mentioned, 10 countries voted against, amongst which I mentioned Argentina, Hungary, and a certain number of countries close to the United States, for example, Panama. But yet the United States is shifting into different perspectives. First of all, it is committed to show to Benjamin Netanyahu the red lines not to cross. And the red lines not to cross, Donald Trump was very clear, is an invasion of the West Bank and dislocation of the Palestinian Authority. He said it, he will not let it happen. Now, what is his capacity to not make it happen? First of all, he will meet during the weekend Benjamin Netanyahu. It will be clearer on what is the position they are agreeing one and the other. Second position, Donald Trump says he will not suspend the weapons delivery to Israel, but he could change if Israel goes too far. For example, France has decided not to deliver any more weapons, but it's not very important. It's way less important than what Americans are spending. We spend 190 billion of euros, when the United States spends at least 3 to 4 billion of euros each year. So it's, again, not the same perspective. Now, Donald Trump also has in mind, and I think we must wait for the weekend to see what happens, the plan, because he said that there may be a surprise during the weekend, and I think we have to look of what will be the 21-point plan that Donald Trump has accepted to endorse, proposed by Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and former Prime Minister Tony Blair. And this comes with a new perspective, to have a sort of international body overseeing the recognition or the reconstruction of Palestine with international donation aid, without Israel being in any part associated to that, without associating the Palestinian authorities at one point, in sort of internationalization of the governance of Palestine. Let's see what is inside this plan. It has not been yet fully presented. We may have a hint, taking in consideration that in 2017, Jared Kushner, Ari Berkovitz, the former advisor for Middle East of the first Donald Trump administration, proposed a deal of the century, saying that Palestine might accept to have money, 70 billion of euros, have to accept the illegal colonization of a certain number of colonies, and in regards or accepting at the other end this sort of de facto recognition by the United States. So I think Donald Trump has a leverage on Benjamin Netanyahu, but to be honest, the speech of Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday gave me the impression that Israel does not care anymore about the position of the United States. And Israel has its own agenda. It's not waiting for the acceptance or not, the positiveness or not of the United States. And to bring back to the first question, the position of France is absolutely irrelevant. It has not any capacity to put pressure nor on the United States nor on Israel.
That's some interesting observation from your part. And we have last question to wrap up this discussion. So as it is obvious that this recognition amplified, as we could say, the maybe historical, if you want, historic diplomatic shift regarding the Palestine issue. It boosted, obviously, the morale of the Palestinian Authority and created at least some pressure on Israel. But how does the French position and this general trend on recognition of the Palestine reshape the regional dynamics? And regional dynamics, I mean the Middle Eastern dynamics. What kind of actors in the region are happy about this? Who are not happy? How will it impact for example, the Saudi Arabia-Israeli ties or Egyptian-Israeli ties? Could you maybe in a few minutes explain what kind of processes it may activate in the region?
Sure. Well, I think what activates more of the new dynamics of the new paradigm in the region is what Benjamin Netanyahu said, taking the floor in the United Nations yesterday. During 1 year, everything has changed by the action of Israel. Unfortunately, may some say, but it is reality. The eradication of Hezbollah, the dismantle of the political wing, and the elimination of the political leadership, Yahya Sinwar, Ismail Haniyeh, of Hamas, the total collapse of the threats of the proxies all around Israel. Iraqi Shia militias, Houthi on one side, and the Islamic Revolutionary Corps, which has been dismantled, destroyed during most of which have been destroyed during the last May-June strike in Tehran, made by Israel. So what has changed? The new Middle East is, of course, more reliant on the issue that Palestine, the recognition of Palestine goes with the recognition of Israel. So that is one element which is undeniable, and it is imposed by the military capacity of Israel, or the showcase of the military capacity of Israel. Second point, the new dynamics of the Middle East comes with the issue or the understanding that the Middle East is way bigger than the only Mashreq region, and that the Western Occidental stability lies also with the Western dynamics in Africa, well, the eastern part of Africa, and of course what is happening around the Red Sea, in Sudan, in Egypt, and of course in the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, that the impact of what is happening between Israel, well, the tensions and the strikes, common strikes from Israel to Iran, from Iran to Israel, also impacts all of the Gulf countries, but as well as the neighboring countries, South Asia, Central Asia. For example, India is active, totally in action with this dynamics. Just take in consideration the economical capacity of the so-called IMEC, India, Middle East, and Israel interconnectivity as a alternative solution to the Silk Road from China, or the middle corridors coming from Central Asia through Turkey or through Russia, south of Russia. So I think this reality is based on the fact that new actors have come in. Turkey is regaining momentum in that perspective. Egypt has its own agenda, again, a very tense agenda. Officially, recognition of Israel since 1978, as well as Jordan, 1994, as well as Morocco, 2020, but the population being totally hostile to Israel and putting pressure on both King of Morocco, Mohammed VI, President al-Sisi, and King Abdullah II.
The so-called Arab Street.
Arab Street, absolutely, and President Abdallah in Jordan. On the other hand, the traditional actors, Russia and the United States, have been weakened as a sort of homogeneous hegemon leadership. The United States is not the only partner of Israel. Israel has other partners. I mentioned Russia, I mentioned India. I could also mention the fact that it has regained a certain form of legitimacy with actors from, example, Indonesia. Very interesting what the Indonesian president said at the United Nations General Assembly, saying that the peace will come only when there will not be a full-fledged recognition of Palestine, but when the entire world will recognize Israel. And this is very interesting, coming from the most populated Muslim country. Of course, Indonesia cannot be taken as granted on that perspective. And of course, not to forget that Indonesia obviously sustained from the beginning the recognition of Palestine. So my point is saying that I'm not sure that United States is the only decision or the broker decision maker in that region anymore. It's not the only one, at least, anymore. I think Europe has totally been vanished, totally pushed aside by a non-decisive action, whether it comes late or whether it comes at the wrong position to sustain the Palestine, the two-state solution, and reaffirm the two-state solution. And again, France is not speaking on behalf of the European Union. It would have been stronger if all of the European Union would have said at the one time, we are sustaining Palestine. If you look, for example, at the State of the Union speech of Ursula von der Leyen 10 days ago, she put pressure on Israel, saying that she was willing to stop or to block the commercial deal of the association process with Israel, but not to totally erase the association process with Israel. So giving a bit of perspective in case, just in case, or just to not push Israel too much in its core opposition to the European Union. So coming to the essential, will the French position change something? It gives an impulse. It brings out the fact that a certain number of states have been willing to find the minimum consensus. France has been at least in capacity to bring out the minimal consensus. That does not mean that everything is done. That does not mean that Palestine will tomorrow have a seat at United Nations, because, of course, to do so, the Security Council must be decided on a unanimous way, and this, of course, will not happen.
And on this note, I would like to thank you for those quite extensive and interesting notes and your thoughts on this issue. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Denys.